This is where we do a deeper dive into the most high-profile and memorable true crime cases. A death in an Iowa home leads to many questions and a horrifying outcome.
Chickasaw County 911.
Hey, ambulance sent up.
Okay, what's going on?
Around 9, my girlfriend went to see their son, and then about 11 or 11:30, she went to check on him, and he was gone.
Gone meaning?
He died.
2 miles. That's how far paramedic Tony Friedrich had to drive that morning. Just 2 miles. And she walked into a nightmare that would never leave her. Inside the dim apartment on Hilltop Avenue, everything was quiet. Too quiet. In the bedroom, 21-year-old Cheyenne Harris stood with wide eyes and the kind of hollow calm that unsettled even the most seasoned responders. Blonde, delicate, soft-spoken. At first glance, she looked like any young mother. But nothing about this scene was normal. On a filthy swing seat, in the darkest corner of the room, lay Sterling. Just 4 months old. Still, cold, and gone. Zachary Paul Koehn, 29, the boy's father, arrived soon after. By all outward appearances, he was a devoted dad. He often called his daughter Nala, just 2 years old, his princess. But Sterling had lived in another world, a forgotten world. Just down the hall, separated not by walls, but by willful neglect. The apartment wasn't empty of care. It was selective. In one room, Nala had toys, food, love. In the other, Sterling slowly died. Born on May 1st, 2017, during a loud, chaotic party, Sterling was the product of a relapse, both parents deep in substance abuse. He came into the world unwanted. From his first breath, he was forgotten. Cheyenne barely interacted with him. Zachary focused on Nayla. They both used drugs. They both chose who got love and who didn't. In July 2017, Jennifer Shriver, a local mother of 4, noticed something wasn't right. She offered to babysit. When she held Sterling for the first time, her heart sank. He was frail, underweight, covered in a raw, untreated diaper rash. During one visit, Cheyenne left him alone during a thunderstorm, just vanished for 30 minutes. Shriver only babysat twice, but in those brief hours, she fed him, changed him, soothed him. Sterling came alive. It was the only love he'd ever know. There was no third visit. By August, horror had become routine. Zachary worked nights, slept days. Cheyenne cared for Nala, or got high. Sterling was placed in a swing and turned toward the wall, isolated in every sense. Jordan Clark, a friend who regularly visited to use drugs, later said he had no idea there was even a baby in the apartment. Sterling was no longer visible to anyone, and his body began to fail. His weight dropped to 7 pounds, closer to a newborn than a 4-month-old. He was never moved. His diaper hadn't been changed in 2 weeks. Flies laid eggs in the filth. Maggots hatched and fed on his skin. His rash had eaten through to raw tissue. The infection entered his bloodstream. Sepsis. Zachary entered the room, smelled death, and walked out. Again and again. Just a few feet away, Nala played, ate, laughed. In this home, 2 children existed, but only one was treated like a child. On August 30th, 2017, at 1 p.m., Zachary Koehn calmly dialed 911. He claimed his infant son had just died unexpectedly.
She went to check on her, had an urgent cry or whatever, and she passed away. I don't know if it's sudden death syndrome or what.
But by the time first responder Tony Friedrich reached the apartment in Alta Vista, Iowa, it was already far too late, and the truth was far more disturbing than anyone imagined. At the entrance, Zachary stood expressionless. Cheyenne Harris, the baby's mother, held their 2-year-old daughter Nala. No panic, no urgency, just an eerie stillness in the air. Inside the apartment, the windows were darkened, the air thick with the smell of urine and decomposition. In the corner of the room, facing the wall, was a baby swing. It was there that Tony Friedrich found the body of Sterling Koehn. He weighed just 7 pounds, half the healthy weight for a 4-month-old. His skin was cracked and layered with dry, broken crust. His diaper hadn't been changed in at least a week. Maggots crawled across his legs and abdomen. His eyes were shut, his body cold. Sterling hadn't just died. He had been dying slowly for weeks. In the next room, little Nala was healthy and well-fed, dressed in a clean, frilly dress as if for a birthday party. The refrigerator was full of fresh food. The cupboards had unopened baby formula and clean diapers. The resources were there. The care wasn't. Sterling's death wasn't sudden. It was a choice. And it was silent. Zachary worked nights as a trucker. Cheyenne was supposed to stay home and look after the baby. But she didn't. Their lives revolved around drug use, meth mostly, and they had long ago abandoned even the bare minimum of parental instinct. Instead, they created 2 completely separate worlds within the same home. One for Nala, full of food, games, and affection, and one for Sterling, defined by isolation, silence, hunger, and pain. Only one outsider ever saw the truth and tried to intervene. That summer, a woman named Jennifer Schriever agreed to babysit Sterling for a few days. She was horrified at his condition: skeletal, quiet, visibly malnourished. During the 2 days she cared for him, she fed him every 2 hours. She soothed his skin, cleaned his wounds, held him close. Sterling responded immediately, eating ravenously, showing signs of joy. But she was never asked back. He was soon hidden again, left to wither in the shadows. By the time the autopsy was performed the next day, August 31st, 2017, the findings were unthinkable. The diaper rash had become so severe that open sores exposed raw flesh. Bacterial infection had entered his bloodstream and triggered sepsis. The insects in the diaper had laid eggs. Larvae were found on the body. His death certificate listed malnutrition, severe neglect, and untreated infections as causes. The infant had died in agony, over time, alone. When police searched the apartment, they found no shortage of baby supplies. Formula, diapers, clothes, all untouched. There was no medical emergency, no act of God. There was simply no care. In October, charges were filed against both parents: first-degree murder and child endangerment resulting in death. They showed no emotion during booking. On television, Cheyenne appeared dazed, with messy blonde hair and wide, empty eyes. Zachary refused to face the camera. In court, the details stunned even seasoned prosecutors.
Ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear in this case that the defendant, when she gave birth to Sterling, welcomed that child home to her family, to the residence that they shared in a little town in northeast Iowa in Chickasaw County called Alta Vista. Alta Vista, you'll hear in this case, is like a lot of small towns. It's a couple hundred people, and the defendant lived there in a small apartment. That apartment had 2 bedrooms, a living room, a bathroom, and a kitchen. And the evidence will show that the defendant welcomed this child into her home that she shared with her living boyfriend, Zachary, and another child, Nala, a little girl who was almost 2. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show in this case when the defendant received the blessing of that child, Sterling, little Sterling that was born to her, she also received the great responsibility. Sterling was as vulnerable as only a little baby could be. He was completely dependent on all of the caretakers in his life for all of his needs. Sterling couldn't feed himself. He couldn't regulate his temperature if he was hot or cold or needed a blanket or not. He couldn't change his diaper. He couldn't be sure that he was safe. He relied on the caretakers. He couldn't take care of his own medical needs. If he was ill, he relied on his parents for assistance to take care of him. Sterling was vulnerable as only a baby could be. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case will show that the defendant, that child's mother, Cheyenne Harris, failed in her responsibility as a parent. She failed little Sterling. She violated the trust that Sterling placed in her as her mother. And ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case will show by her actions, Sterling lost his life. Ladies and gentlemen, the actions of the defendant that you'll hear in this case will show that she placed little Sterling in the back bedroom of that two-bedroom apartment in Alta Vista. She placed Sterling in a swing, one of those mechanical swings that swings back and forth, the baby swing. She placed that swing against the wall in a dark, unlit room that was hot and stuffy with no air movement because it was August. The windows were covered. And ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case will show that Sterling laid in that swing, he laid in that room in a diaper that hadn't been changed in as many as potentially 14 days, somewhere between 9 and 14 days, his diaper hadn't been changed. The evidence will show that Sterling laid in that same diaper, filled with feces and soaked with urine, such that the feces attracted flies. They're called scuttle flies. They were attracted by the feces in the diaper. They laid eggs, those flies, in his diaper. And those eggs hatched into maggots, and the maggots began feeding on the contents of little Sterling's diaper. You're also going to hear evidence in this case that when he laid in that diaper in that room between 9 and 14 days, that little Sterling's skin under his diaper began to rupture, that the integrity of his skin was lost and began to slough off. And you're going to hear, ladies and gentlemen, that was because the contents of his diaper became like sewage. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case will show that little Sterling died of malnutrition. He weighed at the time of death under 7 pounds at almost 4 months of age. He was on the 5th percentile in the growth and weight chart, not where he was supposed to be. He died of malnutrition because he wasn't fed. He died of dehydration. You'll see his body was dehydrated. The soft spot in his head was sunken in because he was dehydrated, because he did not receive fluids and formula or milk. He was dehydrated. And he also died, ladies and gentlemen, of diaper rash. Diaper rash. When I told you the evidence will show that his skin was ruptured and began to slough off, that allowed the bacteria that was in his feces, E. coli bacteria, to enter into his systems, into his bloodstream, and cause an infection. Malnutrition, dehydration, infection caused by E. coli bacteria. That's what caused Sterling's death. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case will show that the defendant, Cheyenne Harris, was a stay-at-home mom, that she was in that apartment. Ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake, the evidence in this case will show that Sterling suffered in the last hours and days before his death. His body racked by fever from infection, with maggots feeding on his body's fluids, on the contents of his diaper, laying in urine and feces, soaked clothing. And at that time, his mother wasn't out of state. She wasn't across town. She was in the next room in that little apartment, ignoring his cries, ignoring his basic needs, ignoring her child, to lay in the swing, unloved, uncared for, and unaided by his mother. Ladies and gentlemen, evidence in this case will show that her actions were unexcusable, and they rise to the level of murder in the first degree and child endangerment resulting in death. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not the time to talk about the law. At the conclusion of this case, the judge will tell you what the law is, and you'll have to follow that law. But suffice to say that under our law, felonious child endangerment under certain circumstances qualifies as murder in the first degree. So how are we going to prove, in this case, the defendant's actions? Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear that at about 12:55 p.m. on August 30th, 2017, the defendant's live-in boyfriend, the father of the child, placed a 911 call at 12:55 p.m. And in response, first responders and deputies went to the residence, and they're going to describe what they found. You're going to hear from Tony Friedrich, who was a EMT first responder, and she was at her home when she got the call that there was an infant in distress. And of course, she rushed to the scene, rushed there thinking that she was going to be performing CPR or doing something to assist a child. And she kind of got lost, and she ran into a rural mail carrier, Tina Shatek, who directed her to the residence. You're going to hear from Miss Frederick and Miss Shatek as well, the mail carrier. Miss Frederick, the EMT, first responder, will describe when she went into the residence what she found. She'll describe going into that back bedroom where Miss Harris had left her baby, Sterling. Miss Friedrich, the EMT, will talk about how the air in the room felt, what she smelled, what she saw. And she'll describe how she saw little Sterling in that swing facing the wall. And she'll describe how she reached out to his body to see if he had a pulse. And his little fists were clenched like this. And he was cold to the touch. But she knew then that there was nothing she could do to save Sterling. You're also going to hear from Deputy Jason Russell, who was the first deputy that went into that back room. And he went in the back room, and he'll describe what he saw. And he'll describe that he began to photograph the scene, and he began his investigation, make sure they preserved evidence. And ladies and gentlemen, he'll testify about how he saw little flies in the air, and how when he moved the blanket that was laid over the top of Sterling in the swing, he saw flies fly out of it. And ladies and gentlemen, I said you'll hear that Deputy Russell began the investigation, because at that point, ladies and gentlemen, little Sterling Koehn's body was a crime scene. It was a crime scene. And you'll hear that little Sterling's body was taken to the Des Moines area, to the state medical examiner's office, so there could be an autopsy performed. You're going to hear from Dr. Dennis Klein. He's the Iowa State medical examiner. His job as a pathologist is to perform autopsies on people. And he'll describe to you that an autopsy, the purpose of it is to determine the cause of death and the manner of death. And he'll testify that the cause of Sterling's death was malnutrition, dehydration, and the E. coli bacteria, that diaper rash, and all of that together is denial of critical care. That was the cause of death. He'll also testify that the manner of death was homicide. It was homicide. You're also going to hear, ladies and gentlemen, that during the autopsy, Dr. Klein preserved by photographs as well as taking samples some of those insects that he found. And you're going to hear why he did that. And you're going to hear that he sent those samples and those photographs to somebody named Dr. Tim Huntington. And Dr. Huntington is going to testify in this case. He's what's called a forensic entomologist. Entomology is the study of insects. And Dr. Huntington is going to testify, and he's a professor of entomology and biological science at a college out in Nebraska, okay? And he's board certified, and he'll talk about that. And he's going to tell you that in this case, he identified the insects that were found in Sterling's body as scuttleflies. And he'll describe the scuttlefly as a fly that's common in our homes here in Iowa. In fact, you might see them, they're like little gnats. You might see them around bananas or fruit that you have out on the counter, and that their life cycle is very well studied. There's been a lot of scientific study of their life cycle. And you're going to hear from Dr. Huntington, the evidence will show that he was able to examine, because the life cycle of the scuttlefly is very well understood, he examined the insect evidence taken from Sterling's body, and he was able to conclude that Sterling had laid in that same diaper for between 9 and 14 days. And the way he was able to do that is he'll describe how slow flies are attracted to a food source, in this case, the contents of Sterling's diaper. They lay an egg, it hatches into a maggot, the maggot feeds, and eventually goes into like a little cocoon phase before it enters as a fly. And he'll be able to explain what he found and how he was able to conclude, that the diaper had been on the child for between 9 and 14 days. Ladies and gentlemen, you're also going to hear in this case that this is not a case where the parent, Miss Harris, lacked resources or was an inexperienced parent. You're going to hear, ladies and gentlemen, that her live-in boyfriend, Mr. Koehn, he had a full-time job. He worked at a trucking company, and he earned a salary of $45,000 per year. You're also going to hear, ladies and gentlemen, that other child in the home, her name is Nala. She was only almost 2 years old. The evidence will show that she was healthy, in contrast to Sterling. In contrast to Sterling, she was properly clothed and clean and bathed. She was properly fed. In fact, some of the witnesses might describe her as chubby or chunky. She was properly in a proper bed with proper blankets, in contrast to Sterling. This is not a case where the defendant lacked the ability to properly care for a child. Ladies and gentlemen, at its heart, the evidence will show that this case is about actions and consequences. Actions and consequences. The actions of the defendant in this case directly caused the death of her child, Sterling Koehn. That was the consequences. The consequences of her actions is that the defendant is guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree and guilty of the crime of child endangerment resulting in death. And at the conclusion of the case, the state will stand up before you again and ask you to find her guilty of those charges. Thank you. You may. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case will show that on May 1st, 2017, the defendant received a blessing. Born to him and his living girlfriend, Cheyenne Harris, was a son. They named that son Sterling Koehn. That child, Sterling Koehn, was born on May 1st, 2017. And this is a photograph taken of him on July 15, 2017.
Which exhibit is that?
Exhibit 96, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, the defendant and his live-in girlfriend welcomed this child to their home. They lived in a small town in Chickasaw County, Iowa, a town of about 400 people. The town was Alta Vista. They lived in an apartment. That apartment had 2 rooms, 2 bedrooms. It had a living room, it had a kitchen, and it had a bathroom. You're going to hear from this child's maternal grandmother, Randy Harris, who took this picture. She will tell you that through that summer, she watched Sterling from time to time on the weekends. Sterling was healthy, he ate properly, she cared for him. She loved little Sterling, like the grandchild that he was. He was beginning to smile. That grandmother, Randy Harris, will testify the last time she saw little Sterling alive was on August 5th, 2017, where they went to a little town festival called Wapsie Days, a little community in Northeast Iowa. Ladies and gentlemen, when the defendant was granted the blessing of that child, he was also granted a responsibility. Little Sterling, was as vulnerable as only an infant could be. He was completely dependent on everybody in his life that cared for him. The defendant, his father, and the other caretakers. Little Sterling couldn't feed himself. He couldn't change his diaper. He couldn't regulate his temperature if he was cold or hot. He couldn't put clean clothes on. He couldn't make sure that he was safe. If he needed medical attention, he got it. He was vulnerable as only an infant can be. And ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show that this defendant, this father, whose responsibility it was to care for little Sterling, failed in his responsibilities. He failed. The evidence in this case will show by his actions, he directly caused Sterling's death. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case is going to show that little Sterling was placed in a swing in an unheated, stuffy, hot room in that apartment. That he was left in the same diaper for at least 9, maybe 14 days. He was left in that diaper full of stool, such that it attracted bugs, flies that laid their eggs in that diaper, which eggs hatched into maggots while Sterling was alive. And those maggots were in his clothes and in his diaper, feeding on the feces in his diaper. And he laid in that room, in that diaper, between 9 and 14 days. And the evidence will show that that stool in his diaper irritated his skin, such that it ruptured the skin and his bodily fluids came out. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case is going to show that Sterling died of malnutrition. He was under 7 pounds at almost 40 months of age, on the 5th percentile in the Grower chart. He died of dehydration because he wasn't fed, and he didn't get water or hydration through milk, and because of his injuries. And ladies and gentlemen, he died of diaper rash. That's right, diaper rash. The evidence is going to show that that feces he sat in that diaper ate through his skin, allowing E. coli bacteria that was in his diaper and in the stools to enter his bloodstream and cause an infection. Malnutrition, dehydration, infection caused by diaper rash. That's what caused this child's death. And ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show that this defendant, the father of that child, is responsible for that death. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case will show that on August 30th, 2017, this defendant called 911. He called 911 at about 12:55 in the afternoon. And he told the 911 dispatcher that his son had died. He told the dispatcher that his son had died of SIDS, or sudden infant death syndrome. So ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show that that's not what happened in this case. This was not an accident. That was a cover story concocted by this defendant to cover the awful truth. The evidence in this case will show that this was a homicide, that this was murder in the first degree. And this defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree. Now, at the conclusion of this case, the judge will tell you the law, and this is not the time and place to talk about the law. The judge will give you that law at the end of this case. But murder involving felonious child endangerment of a child under certain circumstances is murder under our law. Ladies and gentlemen, again, the judge will talk about that at the end of the case, and you'll have kind of a law to apply to the facts of this case. As you listen to the facts of the case, I want to kind of lay out what happened in this case. What's the evidence going to show? You're going to hear from the first responders that responded in response to the defendant's 911 call. He called about 12:55, and you're going to hear from Tony Friedrich. She is a first responder that lived in the same community within a few miles of the apartment. She's going to tell you that when she got her page, immediately went there immediately drove there. And while she was driving there, she knew it was an infant in distress. And she was thinking CPR. And she was getting ready to perform CPR. And as she drove to that residence, she couldn't find it. She was confused, and she saw a mail carrier, Tina Shatek. And you're going to hear Tina Shatek testify as well. And she directed her to the residence. And you're going to hear that first responder, that Tony Friedrich, testify. When she got there, she saw the defendant standing outside. And she asked, "Where's the baby?" And she'll describe his appearance, his emotional state. And he led her into the apartment and brought her into that back bedroom. And you're going to hear that first responder testify that she said, "We need light in here because it was dark." And the defendant flipped on the light and he left. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to hear that first responder describe what she found in that room. She found the child, Sterling, in a swing. One of those swings you have for babies that go back and forth. You can turn it on. You probably have all seen those or had them in your own house. And he was faced, as you walked in the room, the back wall was there. He was faced directly facing the wall. Not the doorway, not the room, facing the wall. The room was hot and stuffy. This was in August. There was no air movement in the room. There was a blanket on the wall covering the window. It was dark. It was dark. And she'll testify about what she smelled, how she smelled urine and dirty diapers. And she'll testify that she reached for Sterling's arm to try to take his pulse, and his little fists were clenched like this, and they were rigid. And she'll testify about what that means. She'll testify he was cold. She'll testify that he had clothing that had dried blood on it. He had dried blood on his mouth. She'll testify that when she moved a little blanket on top of him, she saw bugs. She saw insects flying. You're also going to hear from Deputy Jason Russell. He was the first deputy that arrived into that room. He will also testify because he photographed to document that apartment what he found. He'll testify that he felt little Sterling's clothing, and it was wet. It's soaked with urine. He observed Sterling sitting in that little swing and had a cloth cover. It was one just like Deputy Russell had at home. You could see a stained outline of the cover from the bodily fluids and the diaper contents that had run off of Sterling's body. He'll testify that he also saw those flies. Ladies and gentlemen, at that time, little Sterling's body was a crime scene. And you're going to hear that they took little Sterling's body down to Ankeny, Iowa, near Des Moines, to do an autopsy. You're going to hear in this case from Dr. Dennis Klein, who's the Iowa State Medical Examiner. His job as a pathologist is to do autopsies on people that die like Sterling. And he performed an autopsy on Sterling Koehn. Dr. Klein will tell you that there's two purposes of an autopsy. One is to find the cause of death, and two is to find the manner of death. Dr. Klein is going to testify that he found that Sterling was malnourished, and he'll explain how he did that through an examination of his body, that he had grown very little. His weight at the time of his death was not much more than the weight at the time of his birth, nearly 4 months before. He was malnourished. We'll talk about how dehydration affected his body. And he'll also talk about how that E. coli got into his bloodstream and caused an infection. Ladies and gentlemen, you're also going to hear from Dr. Klein talking about how that infection, how that diaper rash and that resulting infection, how that dehydration would have manifested. What kind of symptoms would Sterling have been looking at exhibiting because of his medical condition? Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Klein is going to testify, and you're going to hear it from this witness stand, that it would have been obvious to anybody that Sterling was not right, that he had a medical condition. He would have been lethargic. He may have had diarrhea or vomiting. He was not a normal, healthy child. Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear Dr. Klein testify that the cause of death was denial of critical care, that little Sterling was dependent on the care of his caretakers, and they denied him that care, resulting in malnourishment, dehydration, and that diaper rash resulting in that infection. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll also hear from Dr. Klein that the manner of death was homicide. You're also going to hear from Dr. Klein that he photographed the autopsy, and you're going to have to see some of those photographs. He also collected some entomology evidence. And what entomology is the study of insects, He collected some entomology evidence, bug evidence, insect evidence, and he sent it to an expert. You're going to hear from that expert. His name is Tim Huntington. He is a forensic entomologist. He's board certified. And what that means is that he looks at insect evidence from crime scenes and he uses that to date certain things. And you're going to hear from Dr. Tim Huntington, who's a professor of entomology in a college in Nebraska. You're going to hear him testify that the life of a scuttle fly, those are little flies in your house that look almost like fruit flies. You may see them in your house flying around. They're very tiny, almost like gnats. They have a well-studied life cycle. And you're going to hear Dr. Huntington explain when these type of flies, when they're ready to lay eggs, they find a food source. In this case, that was the diaper, bodily fluids running off of the skin of little Sterling. And they laid their eggs in these scuttle flies in that diaper. And those eggs hatch into maggots, which then feed on the diaper and its contents. And eventually those little maggots, they come into like a cocoon, almost like a butterfly, before they emerge as flies. And you'll hear Dr. Huntington, the board-certified entomologist, explain that based on his review of the information, the diaper and its contents had been on Sterling for at least 9 and for as many as 14 days. Ladies and gentlemen, you're also going to hear from Special Agent John Turbin, who's an investigator with the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. He was called to assist and work hand in hand with the Chickasaw County deputy sheriff that were involved in this case. He conducted on August 30th an interview of Mr. Koehn. And he basically had him go through his day prior to that. And you're going to hear that the defendant told Special Agent Turbin that the day before, this happened on Wednesday, the Tuesday before, he got up at about 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and he spent his day with his family. You're also going to hear in this case, ladies and gentlemen, that there's a 2-year-old child living in that apartment. The defendant's daughter with Cheyenne. He said he spent that day with Cheyenne and the family, including Sterling. I want to talk about Nala for a minute. That's her name. She's almost 2 years old. When deputies arrived and first responders arrived, they saw Nala. And they noted the contrast between her and little Sterling. Sterling was dead, laying in soiled clothing, not fed, not hydrated. Nala was properly clothed. She was healthy. She had been fed. She wasn't wet. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a case, the evidence will show, where you hear about a young, inexperienced parent or someone who did not know how to care for children. Nala was properly cared for. But going back to that Tuesday, you're going to hear that the defendant claimed to have played with Sterling that day. And he had gone into that swing and played with him. You're going to hear, ladies and gentlemen, that he said that Sterling was a healthy baby. There was nothing wrong with him. And when he played with him, he appeared to be alert and happiness. Ladies and gentlemen, part of your duty in this case is going to be to decide credibility. You're also going to hear a few days later, the defendant was interviewed by Sheila Schroeder, an investigator with the Iowa Department of Human Services. When he was interviewed by Special Agent Turbot on August the 30th, the defendant denied anybody in that home was using drugs. When he was interviewed a few days later by Sheila Schroeder, he told her, in contrast, that he had provided drugs to Cheyenne, Sterling's mother, Mal's mother, and he used methamphetamines 2 times a week. You're also going to hear from the defendant's friend, Jordan Clark, who worked with the defendant. You're going to hear him explain that he had been to that apartment on a couple occasions, and he worked with the defendant for a few months, saw him a couple times a week. And he, Jordan Clark, the defendant's friend, did not even know they had a baby. But when he went to that apartment where he used drugs with the defendant, that back bedroom door was closed, and he did not even know that they had a baby. Ladies and gentlemen, you're also going to hear that this isn't a case where the defendant didn't have resources to properly care for the child. You're going to hear that the defendant started a job on May 15th or 16th, 2017, a few weeks after the birth of Sterling. He worked for a trucking company. Nugent's Nuggets was a trucking company in Charles City, Iowa, a short distance from where the defendant lived. And what the defendant did is he hauled broilers and chickens from farms located in Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota to the Simply Essentials chicken slaughter plant in Charles City. So what the defendant would do is he would go to Charles City from his home to the Simply Essentials plant, pick up his truck, drive a few hours, pick up the chickens, drive back to the plant and leave them there. He worked in the overnight hours. He typically going to work in the after supper or supper time, 5, 6, or maybe even later, when you get done in the early morning hours. You're going to hear that the defendant earned $45,000 a year was his salary, that he was offered health insurance. You're not going to hear this is a case where the defendant didn't have ample resources to care for the child. Ladies and gentlemen, this case at its heart is about actions and consequences. Actions and consequences. It's about the defendant's actions and what he did to little Sterling. Ladies and gentlemen, the consequences of his actions were that Sterling lost his life. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show in this case that the consequences of his actions are the defendant is guilty of both charges, murder in the first degree and child endangerment resulting in death.
Nurse Tony Friedrich testified about what she saw that day.
My name is Tony Friedrich.
Can you spell your last name for the court reporter?
Friedrich.
Frederick, you recently retired, is that correct?
That's correct.
Where did you work at?
I worked at St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, Minnesota for the Mayo Foundation. I worked in the intensive care unit after you have heart surgery. We do heart surgery on newborns all the way to adults on my unit. We take care of them.
How long have you done that for?
For about 30 years.
What is the full amount of years that you've had in the medical field?
It's about 35.
And when did you retire?
Just last month.
What is your educational background?
I got my Associates of Diploma and of Associates of Arts degree from Mason City, Iowa. I have certificates in basic life support, adult, advanced adult life support, pediatrics life support. And I'm also a county medical examiner investigator through our county in Chickasaw.
What does that mean?
That means that if someone dies unexpectedly, they would call one of us there's 3 of us in the county. They would call one of us, and we would go out and assess and survey the situation, and then hand our assessment over to the medical examiner in the county, and then he would write the death report.
Or it could also go to the state medical examiner.
Absolutely. If we deem that it needs to go to the state medical, there's certain criteria we go by. And if we deem that it needs to go for an autopsy, we send it either to the state medical examiner, or we can also send it to Mason City, Iowa.
Now, you also have worked as a first responder over the years, correct?
Correct.
How long have you done that?
Before I had children, and then once I kind of got into having kids, well, I have 3. Anyhow, I was a first responder at that point, and then I stopped because I just couldn't do it when the kids were little. And so then after, in the last, since 2014, I got back into being a first responder again.
What are your duties as a first responder?
We have, how our county is set up, we have pagers that now goes on to your cell phone when there's a call and you're available to go in your area, that you just get paged out to that call, and then you would just go.
Is that a volunteer position?
Volunteer, yes.
Do you still do that now?
Yes.
All right, I'd like to talk to you about August 30th, 2017. Were you paged out to a residence regarding an infant?
Yes.
Where were you at when you received the page?
I was in my kitchen.
And without giving your address, generally where's your residence at?
It's like about 3 miles from Alta Vista. We farm.
About what time did you receive that?
It was around 1 o'clock.
What did you do?
I got in, thank you. I got in my car and I went.
And did you have an understanding as to what you were going to?
Yes. The page came out as a 4-month-old, possibly dead. So my mind goes, okay, CPR, basic life support, respiratory. Well, I was going to be doing CPR on this child.
You've been to scenes with infants in distress before.
At work, I have seen infants in distress before, yes.
So how long did it take you to get to Alta Vista?
Not very long.
A few minutes?
Yeah.
Were you able to find the residence right away?
No, I missed the apartment 7. So the streets Hilltop goes north and south. So I was looking for the address on the north and south Hilltop, when in fact, and I had to call back in. And at the time that I called back in, I saw Tina Shoddick, who's the mailman. She was stopped, and at the same, and it was summertime. I had the windows down. At the same time I was talking on the phone to get the address again, then Tina was right there, and when he said apartment 7, then I knew where to go because I know those apartments.
And the apartments are somewhat in a block, it's a complex, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you were just unsure which side of
Yes.
the complex to go to?
Yes.
And you said you ran into Tina Shoddick, do you know her?
Yeah, she's a neighbor, yes.
All right, so did Tina help you get to the right address as well?
She, at the same time that when I called back in, it came over, he said apartment 7, and then I just took off after that.
You arrived at the apartment.
Yes.
What did you do?
So I pulled up, and I pulled right up, and I saw a man, a woman, and a little girl, and I got on my car and I went running up to them and said, "Where's the baby?" Nobody was showing any emotion, and the man goes inside, and I said, "Show me." And so he took me inside, we walked in, and we went to the back bedroom. He took me to the back bedroom, and it was dark, and it was stuffy, and there was a stench of urine there. I was looking for a crib. I couldn't see a crib. I said, "Where's the baby?" And he said, "In the swing." And it was dark. I said, "We've got to get some lights on in here. Turn the lights on." And he flipped the switch, and the lights came on. And he walked away, and he muttered something, and I don't know what he muttered.
What did you see when the lights came on?
Well, you could see the swing. It was facing an outside wall in the corner. And so then I went over so I could see Sterling, the baby. Found out that's what his name was. And to do my assessment, look, listen, and feel. His eyes were fixed and dilated, staring straight out. He had blood around his mouth, and I went to check a brachial pulse on him, and his arm was stiff and rigid and cold. All of his extremities were cold. His little feet were cold. His hands were clenched in a fist, and he wasn't breathing, and his clothes were like crusty.
When you saw Sterling, did you know that there was nothing you could do?
Yeah, there's no CPR. It's it just wasn't right.
Was he in clothing or blankets?
He had clothes on. The clothes that was on his chest was crusty. He had a blanket that was draped over him that was wet. And when I brushed up against that, when I touched that, there were bugs that flew from that.
When you say bugs, what did they look like to you?
Just little gnats, yeah.
How big was this room?
It was a small room.
And you said that the swing was in the far corner facing the outside wall?
Correct.
So when you first walked in the room, could you see Sterling at all?
No.
You were just seeing the back of the swing?
After he turned the lights on, yes. Because I was looking for a crib yeah.
Did the room have windows in it?
There was blankets over the one window that was in there so that it didn't show any light.
What did the room feel like?
It was hot, it was stuffy. There was the stench of urine.
What did you do?
Well, after I did my assessment and realized that I couldn't do anything, I called back into the sheriff's department and asked for the sheriff to come and another medical examiner.
Why did you call the sheriff's department?
Because this was not right. Something was not right here.
Did Tina Shattuck come into the room at any time that you were there?
She came to the door and said, "Tony, what can I do?" And I told her to go out and be with the family. That, yeah.
Who was the next person that arrived that you interacted with?
Jeremy McGrath.
Who's that?
And Jeremy McGrath is another medical examiner investigator. And he also runs and owns the ambulance service there in Chickasaw County.
How long did you stay at the scene?
I stayed there until law enforcement told me to leave.
You stayed with Sterling.
Yes.
While you were at the residence, did you ever leave Sterling?
No.
Did you see the defendant, Cheyenne Harris, at the house that day?
When I got there, yes.
Was she present in the courtroom?
I can't see her. She has her head.
If the judge could ask the defendant to move her hand from her face.
Thank you, Ms. Harris.
Yes,
With the purple shirt on.
correct.
The record would reflect that the witness has identified the defendant.
So noted.
What did you observe her doing? Did you only see her when you first arrived?
That is correct.
Did you ever talk to her?
No.
You said you saw a little girl. What did she look like?
Cute. She had a very nice dress on. It was very colorful. I have 3 daughters. It was kind of a dress that I would put them in for Easter or for a special occasion or something like that. Wasn't a play dress. It was a very nice fancy dress.
I'd like to show you a couple photographs. May I approach you on?
May.
I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibits 2, 3, and 4. Do you recognize those photographs?
Yes.
Are those all photographs that were taken of Sterling while he was in the home?
Yes.
This time the state would enter or offer Exhibits 2, 3, and 4.
Any objections? None. They are admitted.
Permission to publish?
Any objection? Granted.
Could we have these lights out right here? Could we have the lights out right back? I have up State's Exhibit 2. That's fine, thank you. Could you please tell the jury what they're looking at in this photograph?
So this is what you would see if you would have walked into the room and took a couple more steps, and that's where his swing was, sitting towards that wall there at where Sterling was laying.
In the top left corner of the photograph, we see what looks to be a quilt. Is that what was hanging over the window?
Yes. Yes.
There's also a pink blanket on the floor. Was that there when you went in, or did you move that blanket?
I did not move that blanket.
How about the bottle by the wall? Had you moved that?
I didn't touch anything except no, I didn't touch anything of that.
Is it fair to say that you didn't move anything and what you touched was Sterling to see if there was a pulse?
Yes. The pulse and whether or not he was breathing and his extremities.
I'm going to put up State's Exhibit 3. Is this what Sterling looked like when you first came on him?
Yes.
You said this blanket was wet. Is that the blanket that we're seeing, the red and blue blanket on top of him?
Yes.
You felt
And
that?
yes. And that's also the blanket that when I tried to take a brachial pulse, that it moved at, and that's where the bugs.
You had described his arms as being stiff and his little hands and fists. Do we see that in the photograph?
Yes.
I'm going to put up State's Exhibit 4. Is that a closer up picture of Sterling than what you
Yes.
saw that day?
Yes. And again, yeah. And there appears to be stains on the car seat and
Did you see a lot of discoloration on the blankets in the car seat and the swing?
yeah, the car seat, yes.
Or I guess we're calling it a car seat. Is that the swing
It's,
seat?
yeah, the swing, I'm sorry, the swing. And his,
There's no question.
It was what?
it was just his, around his clothing was just crusty. It was hard, it was, yeah.
Jennifer Schriever spoke through tears, describing the brief 2 days she gave Sterling the only love he ever received.
Jennifer Schriever, Jenniffer, Schriever.
And ma'am, where do you live?
Alta Vista, Iowa,
How long have you lived in the Alta Vista, Iowa area?
about 6 years.
And where did you live specifically in Alta Vista on August 30th, 2017?
I lived on 107 South Hilltop Avenue, apartment 11.
And who did you live with at the time?
I lived with my son.
And that apartment complex, we've heard testimony in this case, it has 3 separate buildings, correct?
Yes,
And each one of those buildings contains how many apartments?
4.
And did you live in the same building or a different building as the defendant, Cheyenne Harris?
A different building.
Now, when did you first meet Cheyenne Harris?
I first met her on the day that I was working at the AV Express, the local gas station downtown. She had come in.
In downtown where?
Alta Vista.
And prior to meeting her, had you seen her around the apartment complex?
Yeah, I'd seen her outside.
And so you said that you were working at the convenience store in Alta Vista, correct?
Correct.
And did Miss Harris come into the convenience store?
Yes.
When would this have happened? What month are we talking?
I'm guessing June-ish, end of June, somewhere in there.
Of what year?
2017.
And what happened when Miss Harris came into the convenience store where you were working?
I had asked her, or I introduced myself, said that I had seen her, that she must live in the apartment complex, and welcomed her to Alta Vista.
Were you trying to be a good neighbor?
Absolutely.
Okay. Did Miss Harris, when she came to the convenience store, did she come alone or did she come with somebody else?
I believe she was alone.
Did you know at that time if she had any children?
I had seen her outside with a little girl. I assumed that she had a child.
Did you ever see her outside prior to her coming in the convenience store in June of 2017 with a baby?
No.
Now, was there a time after you met Miss Harris at the convenience store that there was a storm at the apartment complex?
Yes, sir.
When would that have happened in relation to the time you met Miss Harris at the convenience store?
From the time that I met her, I believe it was a couple weeks. It was July when that storm happened. So.
And maybe early July?
Yeah, I'm guessing around, early July.
What happened at the apartment complex with the storm?
A bunch of trees came down. In fact, one of them came down on the front part of the building where she stayed.
And did it fall on the building?
Yes, it fell on the front apartment from their apartment. Their apartment was here. It fell on the front part of the building.
Like a tree branch or an entire tree, or what was it?
Like most of the tree, yeah.
And I assume that got your attention.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Did you go outside?
Oh, yeah, I was outside. There was a lot of damage.
And what time of day would this have been?
I don't recall what time of day.
You remember if it was light or dark?
It was light.
And when you went outside, did you see the defendant, Cheyenne Harris?
I did. She was outside with her daughter.
And her daughter, is that correct?
Yeah.
And what was her daughter's name?
Nala.
And did you talk to Miss Harris?
I did.
And what did you talk about with Miss Harris?
We were talking about the storm. She was upset that her boyfriend Zach had gone and left, and she was stuck in the middle of the storm. She had said that she felt the tree hit, it shook her bed and woke her and Nala up, but it didn't wake the baby up. And at that time I was like, we have a baby. I didn't know she had a baby.
Was the baby outside with Miss Harris?
No, sir.
And you said that's how you learned that she had a baby?
Yes.
Now, when you were outside with Miss Harris, where was she in relation to her apartment?
At that time, during that conversation, we were on the corner of her building.
Was she within earshot of the building where her apartment was at?
At that time, yes.
Now, where was the baby during this conversation?
I'm assuming she left him inside and the baby.
How long was Miss Harris outside with you while the baby was inside?
About 20 minutes to a half hour.
Did Miss Harris have any baby monitor or any other device that she could use to monitor the baby in the apartment?
No.
Where she was at when you were talking to her, could she have heard the baby from the apartment?
Maybe, maybe not. We weren't on the corner the whole time.
You were outside, right?
We were outside, yes.
How long was Miss Harris outside, did you say?
About 20 minutes to a half hour.
When she told you that she had a baby, did you ask her about the baby?
I did.
What did you ask her?
I asked her how old her baby was, and she really couldn't tell me the date. She specified that the baby was born on the first of some month. I can't remember. I want to say May.
Okay.
May or something like that. But she said I can't keep them straight, but she had the baby in the upstairs of a friend's house.
Okay. Now, after meeting Miss Harris at the convenience store and talking to her outside a few weeks later when the storm hit, did you ever meet her live-in boyfriend, that's the defendant's live-in boyfriend, Zachary Koehn?
I did.
Or Cohn, excuse me?
Yes.
And when did you meet him?
I met him, I want to say about a week or two after the storm. He was outside listening to music in my boyfriend's van.
So you said that the storm was in the early part of July. Would this been a few weeks later, so maybe the middle part of July?
Something like that. Yeah, something like that. I'm not 100% sure.
And so how was it that you met Mr. Cohn?
I went outside to talk to my boyfriend, and he was in there, and I introduced myself to him and told him he had a really cute daughter, that she looked just like him.
And was that Nala that you were talking about?
Yes, sir.
Did you also offer to look after Nala if needed?
Yes.
Why'd you do that?
It seemed like Cheyenne needed to maybe get out of the house. She seemed kind of sad every time I seen her.
So you were offering assistance to help her?
Yeah.
Now, how often would you see Cheyenne?
Not too often. Outside every now and then with Noah. Otherwise, she was inside most of the time.
So your observations were fairly limited, is that right?
Yeah.
Were you asked to babysit the children that same day?
Yes.
Who asked you to babysit the kids?
I believe it was Zach. I'm not sure 100%. Yeah, pretty much. I think it was Zach.
And so which kids did you babysit?
I babysat for Noah and for the baby Sterling.
And who were Nala and baby Sterling's parents?
Cheyenne and Zach.
And Cheyenne was the mother, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, how long did you babysit the children?
The first time it was about 17 hours.
About 17 hours?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the first time you'd met Mr. Koehn, correct?
Yes.
Same day?
Yep, in person.
And you had met Miss Harris twice before?
Yes, I had spoken with her twice before.
Now, I want to ask this so the jury understands your own experience caring for children. Do you have your own children?
I do.
How many children do you have?
I have 2.
And have you raised them to adulthood?
Yes, sir.
Have you cared for other children during the course of your life?
Yes.
And can you describe that for the jury?
I have several nieces and nephews that I've cared for over the course of the year, plus I babysat for children in the community that I grew up in.
Is it fair to say that you feel comfortable providing care for an infant?
Yes, sir.
And how about a 2-year-old?
Absolutely.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about your observations of Sterling and Nala when you cared for them, when you babysat them the first time in the middle of July of 2017, okay?
Okay.
First of all, was Sterling a happy baby?
Yeah, he seemed very happy.
And why did you say that?
Oh, yeah, he would smile. He didn't fuss a lot. He just seemed content.
And what observations did you make of the size of Sterling when you babysat him in the middle of July 2017?
When she handed him to me before they left, he seemed really tiny.
What do you mean?
Somewhere in there.
So somewhere in there. Now, between the time,
I think I seen her outside with Nola, but no, not otherwise.
and so can you describe how it was that you came to babysit Sterling and Nala the second time?
They just asked, and I said absolutely.
Who asked you?
I believe it was Cheyenne this time.
And what was it she said to you, if you recall, to ask you to watch the children?
I'm not 100% sure. I was there. I was happy to watch the kids anytime.
And why was it that you were happy to watch the kids?
I love kids. I was working every other weekend at the store, so I had plenty of time on my hands. So it gave me something to do too.
Did you ask Miss Harris or Mr. Koehn for payment for watching the kids?
I did.
And did they pay you?
They did.
How much did they pay you the first time?
I want to say it was 30, I think.
And that was for 16 or 17 hours?
Yeah. A young couple didn't ask for much.
And how about the second time? How much did they pay you?
I think it was around the same, 30 to 40 dollars.
Now, the second time you watched the kids, where did you watch them at?
My house.
And that's the same place you watched them before?
Yes.
And how long did you watch the kids the second time?
I was around the same amount of time, about 16 hours.
Now, I want to go through your observations of the children the second time you watched them, okay? Let's start with Nala. First of all, let me back up just a minute. When you watched the kids the second time, did Miss Harris also seem as well organized as she was the first time?
Absolutely.
Can you describe that for the jury?
She came with her little notebook. Her diaper bags were all organized. It was pretty much the same as the first.
So like the first time, she provided you with directions on how to care for the children. She provided you proper size clothing, proper diapers for each child, etc.?
Yes.
Did you notice any change in Ms. Harris and her organizational skills in those interval of a couple weeks?
No.
Now, the second time when you were asked to watch Nala near the end of July or the 1st of August, was Nala properly clothed?
Yes.
Was she still chubby or chunky?
Yes.
Still appeared to be properly nourished?
Yes.
How about Sterling? How did he appear?
He was still clean, still seemed lightweight, but seemed a little bit healthier, or a little bit heavier, but not a whole lot.
A little bit heavier, you said?
Yeah.
The second time you interacted with Sterling, was he still a happy baby?
Yes.
Would he smile?
Oh, yeah.
What do you mean?
He would always shoot you a smile. Give him a little coochie coo and he'd shoot you a little smile.
How much would he sleep in a day?
Yeah, he sleep about, I don't know how much he would sleep. 2 hours at a time.
And how long would he be up for?
Well, babies sleep all the time, so he would be up for maybe an hour, hour and a half, and want a little nap or whatever.
When the time he was up, what would you do with him?
I would hold him, play with him, you know, give him as much of attention. I didn't put him down a whole lot. I like to hold my babies when I have my babies, so.
When you say you play with him, what do you mean?
Just kind of there.
Would he interact back with you?
A little bit. He'd shoot me a smile or he'd coo.
During the second time that you had Sterling, was he still a happy baby?
Yeah.
Did you feed him bottles the second time you babysat him near the end of July or early part of August?
Yes, sir.
And was it the same that you were provided formula and baby bottles?
Yes.
Was Sterling still able to latch onto the nipple and get the milk or formula out of the bottle the second time you watched him?
Yes.
Did he have any trouble taking the bottle the second time?
No.
Was he still eating well?
Yeah, he was still eating very well.
How would you describe how much formula he took when you watched him the second time?
It was about the same, 6 to 8 ounces every couple hours.
Now, you described the first time that he seemed kind of hungry or was eating a lot, correct?
Yeah, he seemed hungry.
The second time, was that the same?
Yes.
What do you mean?
He would eat pretty fast. Like, he would suckle on the bottle very fast. But I chalked that up as maybe it was a growth spurt. My kids would eat fast like that.
Now, the second time that he stayed with you, Sterling, did you change Sterling's diaper again?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And was there any change the second time in how he would alert you that he needed a diaper change or a bottle or needed some type of attention?
No, he would fuss and he would let me know.
Just like before?
Absolutely.
Did you make any observations of Sterling's bottom the times you changed his diaper the second time you watched him?
Yeah, he still had the diaper rash, but it wasn't nearly as bad as the first time when I watched him.
Did you treat the diaper rash?
Yep, I was still treating it with the A&D ointment.
And how did Sterling respond to your treatment?
He was still responding well, seemed to be getting a little less red.
Now, during the second time, did Sterling respond to the treatment?
Yes.
How was it that the arrangement was made when you agreed to babysit Sterling and all the second time for it to end? How was the pickup going to be arranged?
At that time, I received a text message from Cheyenne that they were going to be home, that she would come over and pick him up, but she needed a little time to breathe from coming off the road.
Okay, so when you were babysitting the second time, did Cheyenne and Mr. Koehn, did they leave the apartment complex?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, that wasn't a very good question, I'm sorry. When you were babysitting, where were Cheyenne and Mr. Koehn? Where did they go?
They went over the road for his truck driving job. I don't know exactly where they had to go, but...
Okay. And did you have a set time that you were going to watch the kids?
There really wasn't a set time.
And was there an expectation that when they arrived home that they would pick up the kids?
Yes.
And so when did you see Cheyenne Harris arrive home?
I did.
And tell me what you mean, how you saw her.
I seen her walking up the sidewalk. I could hear their car pull up. They didn't have the quietest car, so I heard them pull up and seen her walking up into their apartment.
And what time of day was that?
I'm not 100% sure.
Did you watch Sterling overnight?
Yes.
Would it have been the next day?
Yes.
After Miss Cheyenne arrived home and you saw her walking into the apartment complex, did she come directly to pick up the children?
No.
What happened?
She had texted and said that she needed a minute, if she could have a few minutes to just get herself together before coming to get the kids.
Did you agree?
I did.
What happened next?
Nella ran out of milk and she was on her last diaper, and I drew her a text telling her that it was time that she needed to come get the kids.
And did she come get the kids?
No.
Well, how long was it after she arrived at the apartment complex and she said she needed a little time? Did you reach out to her and say that she needed to come get the kids?
I don't know how much time had passed. I just knew that her baby needed milk and needed diapers, and they were starting to get fussy.
And you told her that and she didn't come right away?
No.
What happened?
Me and my boyfriend, I ended up grabbing the kids' stuff and we brought them over to her.
Why did you do that?
Because Nella was fussy. She needed a diaper change. She needed milk, things like that.
What happened when you went to the defendant's apartment?
Ms. Harris came to the door and seen that I had brought the kids over to her, and she kind of rolled her eyes like she wasn't ready to have the kids back.
And did you give her the kids?
Yes.
Was that the last time that you saw Sterling alive?
Yes.
Now, through your interactions with Sterling and Nala, did you form a relationship with them?
With the kids?
Yes.
Absolutely. They're good kids.
Now, after you watched the kids in end of July or early August, if after that time Ms. Harris had come to you or Mr. Koehn and asked you to provide assistance to providing care to the children, would you have done that?
I would have in a heartbeat.
Were you asked to do so?
I wasn't asked again after that, no, after the second time.
Did you try to help Ms. Harris with some food assistance?
I had brought it to her attention at some time that maybe we could apply, or had she applied for food assistance or anything like that, but
When did you do that?
I'm not exactly sure when we had that conversation, but I know we had that conversation.
And what was her response?
Something about Zach's income or something that she wouldn't do it, or they couldn't do it,
Because they made too much money?
or something like that.
Now, I want to turn your attention to August 30th, 2017, the day that Sterling was found dead in the swing, okay?
Okay.
How did you learn that Sterling had died?
I was freshly out of the hospital, just gotten home. I went outside for a cigarette, and I noticed that Mr. Koehn was outside. And I said hi, but he didn't say anything back to me. So I walked over to him and I said, "Is everything okay?" And that's when he stated to me that he was gone. And I said, "Who's gone?" He said, "My boy." I said, "What do you mean gone?" "He's just gone," he said.
And what did you say next?
I don't remember exactly what I said next, but I said, "You mean he's dead? He's gone?" I don't know.
What was Mr. Koehn doing?
He was outside smoking a cigarette.
Did that upset you?
A little bit. I told him, I said, if your baby's gone, I said, "Have you called anybody? Have you called 911 or anything?" He's like, "We don't know what to do." I was like, "Well, you need to put your cigarette down and you should probably go inside and call 911.
Did you see Miss Harris?
I didn't see Miss Harris for some time had passed there.
Now, during the time that you were interacting that summer with Cheyenne Harris and Mr. Koehn and the children, did you know whether or not they had a pet?
I did. I knew they had a dog.
And where did they keep the dog?
As far as I knew, they kept the dog in the bathroom at the apartments because we're not allowed to have pets there.
What was the dog's name?
Leo.
Now, on August 30th, did you get custody of Leo?
I did. They had asked me if I would watch him.
Did they bring Leo over to your apartment?
Leo kind of ran off out of their apartment with me over to my apartment.
Was that before or after the police arrived?
Before.
How long did you keep Leo the dog?
I had him for a couple of days.
Was there a time when you returned Leo the dog to Cheyenne and Mr. Koehn?
Yes.
Where did that turnover of the dog occur?
They came over to the apartment and we took the dog down to the Alta Vista Park.
And when you went to the park, I'm sorry, excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you. When you went to the park, did you give them back the dog?
Oh, yeah.
Did you have a chance to interact with Cheyenne?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that interaction?
They were talking about funeral arrangements and some stuff like that. And at some point she had looked at me and Zach and said, "It seems like everybody's pointing their finger at me." And I agreed with her. That's exactly what it seemed like to me. Like everybody was pointing their finger at her.
And what did she say in response to your statement?
At that time, she kind of winged her arm out over to Zach and said, "I told you we should have taken Nala, Leo, and ran."
Should have taken Nala, Leo, and ran?
Yeah.
And Leo would be the dog, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you respond to that at all?
I didn't know how to respond to that.
Thank you, that's all the questions I have.
Cross?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Ma'am, do they allow pets at that apartment complex?
No, they do not.
So if you had one there and you weren't supposed to, it might be a good reason to have it at your place temporarily. Fair enough?
No, right.
Okay. Just real quickly, you did have an opportunity when you first met Ms. Harris to kind of assess her demeanor, and it sounds like you thought maybe she could use some help. Is that fair?
Yeah, she seemed a little disconnected. She didn't smile a lot. She just didn't seem happy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've said before that she seemed kind of depressed.
Yeah.
That She didn't smile a lot, and that was kind of your observation, probably of why she seemed depressed. Fair enough.
Yes.
And that also, have you said before that she just didn't seem all there?
Yeah, she seemed kind of disconnected.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, ma'am. I don't have anything else.
Can you redirect?
She did, however, show the emotion when you brought the kids back. She seemed to be kind of upset with you, right?
That one day, the second day, yeah, like she wasn't ready to have the kids come home yet.
Thanks. Nothing further.
Was Zach in the house also with her at that apartment when they had returned?
When I returned the kids to them?
Yes.
I don't know where Zach was. She just came to the door herself and kind of just stuck her head out, so I don't know where he was.
So you wouldn't know if that demeanor of Miss Harris at that time was related to the kids or whatever was going on between her and Zach?
Right, I do not know.
Okay, thank you.
Jordan Clark, a frequent visitor to the home, admitted he never even knew there was a baby inside. That's how forgotten Sterling had become, invisible even to guests.
When you went in that bedroom to use drugs away from the little girl, what drugs were you using?
Meth.
How were you ingesting it?
Smoke.
Who else in that apartment was using meth with you?
Everyone.
Who was that?
Would be Zachary and Cheyenne.
So Miss Harris, the defendant, used meth?
Yes.
How did she ingest it?
And smoke as well.
Who brought the meth?
Usually it was there, otherwise I did once.
And you said you were at that apartment 2 or 3 times?
Yes.
Did you use meth with Miss Harris, the defendant, at that apartment the 3 times you were there?
No.
How many times did you use meth with her at the apartment?
Once for sure, possibly twice. I can't remember exactly.
Was that the only drug that you observed Miss Harris using at the apartment?
Yes.
And is the only location in that apartment where you smoked the methamphetamine in the bedroom shared by the defendant and Mr. Koehn?
Yes.
Where was Nala when you were using the meth?
Usually she was running or playing out in the living room or...
Just a few feet away?
Yes.
When you were in that apartment, did you know there was a baby in that apartment?
No.
Did you ever see the door to that back bedroom open where the not the parents' bedroom but the other door?
Not that I can recall.
When you were at that apartment, did Miss Harris ever mention that there was a baby in that apartment?
Not that I recall 100%.
Did you ever see a baby in that apartment?
No.
Did you ever see anybody go in the back room and check on the baby?
I can't say for certain, but not that I can recall.
When you were at that apartment, what was Nala doing?
Usually playing, running around.
Did you see the defendant, Miss Harris, interact and engage with Nala?
Yes.
Describe what you saw.
Happy.
Who was happy?
Cheyenne and Nala.
Did Cheyenne play with Nala?
Yes.
Did she provide any care for Nala?
Yes.
What did you see?
Seeing get food ready for her and essentially take care of her.
Did Nala appear healthy?
Yes.
Did she appear happy?
Yes.
Did she appear to be well nourished?
Yes.
And you said you saw Cheyenne actually prepare food and give it to Nala?
Yes.
Did Nala appear to be well nourished?
Yes.
Was she clean?
Yeah.
Properly clothed?
Yes.
When you said you went to the apartment and you used drugs, you said that there were some drugs already in the apartment that you used, and maybe one time you brought drugs, correct?
Correct.
Do you know how Mr. Koehn and Miss Harris got the methamphetamines that they used?
No.
Do you know how they paid for the drugs that they were using?
No, I do not.
Did you get methamphetamine from Mr. Koehn?
At times, yes.
Did he pay you?
At times, yes.
So sometimes let me start over to make sure the record's clear, okay? And sometimes did Mr. Koehn buy drugs from you?
Yes.
And you sold him drugs?
Yes.
How much did you sell him?
It varied between $20 to $40.
And how many times did you sell him drugs?
Maybe a handful of times. I can't really say for certain.
Did he buy drugs from you? Excuse me, did you buy drugs from him?
On a couple occasions, yes.
And how many times do you think you bought drugs from him?
Maybe 3 to 4 times.
And how much would you buy every time you bought drugs from him?
About the same, $20 to $40 worth.
How much methamphetamine can you get for $20 or $40?
Maybe a half gram.
And how much is a half gram? How many people can get high off a half gram of meth?
I'd say probably 1, maybe 2.
How did you learn that Cheyenne Harris, the defendant in this case, had a baby boy who had died?
The morning, or the August morning, I should say, that Zach had called basically to find someone to work his shift that day.
Is that when you learned for the first time that the defendant, Miss Harris, was the mother of a baby boy?
Yes.
How many hours total do you think you spent in that apartment with Miss Harris and Mr. Koehn?
Altogether, maybe 4 to 6.
And during that whole time, you never saw anybody care for a baby?
No.
Didn't know there was a baby?
Correct.
Prior to Sterling's death on August 30th, 2017, did you have any type of romantic relationship with the defendant, Cheyenne Harris?
No.
After Sterling died, did you develop a relationship with her?
Yes.
How did that happen?
Just from texting back and forth, kind of. One thing led to another.
When did it happen?
Probably mid-September.
And was Miss Harris still together with Mr. Koehn?
I believe so, yes.
Did you meet up with Cheyenne and have sex with her?
Yes.
More than once?
Yes.
Did Mr. Koehn know about it?
After the fact, yes, I believe so.
Did she make efforts to hide it from him before he found out?
I think so, yes.
How do you find out, Mr. Koehn?
I'm not sure.
After he found out, did he and Miss Harris stay together?
I believe somewhat, yes.
Now, to be clear, your relationship with Miss Harris continues to right now, right?
Yes.
How would you describe your current relationship with Miss Harris?
Essentially the same as it was. Kind of much as it can be, I should say.
Now, you write and text her, right?
Correct.
Do you tell her in your writings and texts that you love her?
Yes.
Do you tell her that you want to be with her?
Yes.
Does she say that she loves you?
Yes.
And she wants to be with you?
Yes.
Do you exchange sexually explicit?
Objection, Your Honor. No, I finished the question.
Do you exchange sexually explicit text messages with her?
Same objection.
Sustained.
You're texting and writing Miss Harris. That continues up till the present time, correct?
Correct.
Thank you, sir. That's all the questions I have.
Cross-examination.
Deputy Jason Rassel detailed the investigation.
I was working a day shift. At that time we worked a 6 and 3 schedule, 6 days in a row, 3 days off, and I was assigned a day shift, which was the hours of 9 a.m. in the morning till 5:30 p.m. at night.
On August 30th, 2017, how many deputies were on duty in Chickasaw County?
On that particular day, I was what's considered the call car. Basically, I was the car that if any calls came in, I took it. If there was any papers that needed to be served, I did it. I also had 2 administrators working with me, Sheriff Heeman and Chief Deputy Palo.
So there was 3 of you on duty that day, but you were the one responsible for the calls, correct?
Correct.
So what was the area that you were patrolling or being responsible for that day?
All 505 square miles of Chickasaw County.
Prior to August 30th, 2017, had you ever met the defendant Cheyenne Harris?
No.
How about her live-in boyfriend Zachary Koehn?
No.
Their child Sterling Koehn?
No.
How about their other child, the daughter Nala?
No.
Were you familiar with the community of Alta Vista?
Yes.
Can you kind of describe Alta Vista for the jury, please?
Alta Vista is a small rural county or a town, I guess, on the northwest side of Chickasaw County. Its population is 300 to 400 people. Like I said, it's very rural. Largest town closest to it is New Hampton, which is about the center of our county. So if you think about our county as a square, it's up in the one corner, and the closest big town is in the center.
Is there a local police department in Alta Vista?
There is not.
How about a grocery store or convenience store?
There's I can't remember the name of it, but there's a convenience store gas station.
And is that convenience store and gas station within walking distance of the apartment complex where the defendant lived?
Yes.
Now, you have already testified that on August 30th you were on the day shift as the road deputy, correct?
Yes.
And you were covering all 505 square miles of Chickasaw County, right?
Correct.
Were you dressed that day as you are now in a police uniform?
Exactly.
And was it clear that you were an officer based on your dress?
Yes.
About 12:55 that afternoon on August 30th, 2017, where were you physically located?
I was actually on a previous call. I was on the south side of the county on Highway 63.
And were you dispatched to a call for an infant in distress located at the apartment complex at 107 South Hilltop Avenue in Alta Vista?
Yes, I was. I had been told that there was a 4-month-old that had recently passed.
And can you give the jury an understanding, basically, your physical location, because it's a different county, in relation to where the community of Alta Vista was located?
Yes, as I kind of said, our county is square. Not like your county is more rectangle, ours is more square. Alta Vista is in the northwest corner, so it'd be the upper left corner if you're thinking about it, if you're looking at it. I would have literally been about the other side, the opposite corner on the bottom.
So how far did you have to travel from your location to the call location?
I believe, well, the county as a whole, I would have been on 300th. So I'm not sure the exact miles off the top of my head, but I would have had to go at least from 300th, you have to count all the way up to 100th Street and go over to west, all the way over to basically, it'd be Gilmore. So it'd be anywhere from 14 to 25.
I didn't mean to have you do math
right.
anymore.
Obviously, I didn't get a degree in math, but I don't know the exact miles, but I was literally as far away as I can get in the county.
Okay, and let me ask you a different way. Your report says the call came in about 12:55 and you arrived at the residence at about 1:09 p.m. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I assume that you drove with some pace, correct?
Yes, I did.
And why did you do that?
Because the call said had come in as it was a 4-month-old that had recently passed. We've had calls like that in the past, or we've heard about calls like that in the past, where sometimes we can hook the AED up to that person, maybe save that person, and maybe take some life-saving preventative steps. I drove what we call 1033, which is lights and sirens, and I went about as fast as I safely could get there.
And when you arrived at the apartment complex, did you park there?
I parked just north of the apartment complex.
Can you kind of describe the apartment complex for the jury?
Yeah, if you think about the, let's see, the best way I could describe the apartment complex is it's 3 separate buildings, but they're all part of the same kind of complex. And if you're standing on the north side of the complex looking south towards the buildings, it's basically a backwards U or an N if you're looking at it that way. You have a north-south building on this side, a north-south building on this side, and in the middle is an east-west building.
And which one of the buildings is apartment number 7 located in?
It was in the middle building, the east-west building.
When you arrived at the apartment complex, were other officers there before you?
Yes.
And who was there before you?
Chief Deputy Palo had beat me to the scene.
And when you arrived, what did you do?
As soon as I arrived, I'd seen Chief Deputy Palo's truck. So I called out my location, told dispatch I was on scene, and immediately went towards that building.
And did you go inside the apartment?
I met a male individual who I knew to be the fire chief, Kevin Hubka, and I wasn't sure. I knew the building, but I didn't know which exact apartment was, because there's 4 apartments in each building. And so he had told me which apartment to go to.
So he directed you to the apartment number 7?
Yes.
What did you do next?
Then I went, from there I went into the building and then entered the apartment.
When you went into the apartment, what did you see?
As I entered the apartment, I guess the first thing I noticed is you walk right into the living room area, and there's a kitchen off to the right. I remember thinking it was kind of dirty, but there was a kid's video playing on the TV that had ended, so it kept going on repeat, the end credit, kind of like the repeat the video type deal. And then I remember seeing our ambulance personnel, Jeremy McGrath, and first responder, I guess our medical examiner at that time was Tony Fredericks.
Did you ask where the baby was located?
I did.
And were you directed to where the baby was located?
Yes, they directed me to the back bedroom.
And did you go into that back bedroom?
I did.
Can you kind of describe what you could see when you were in the doorway of that back bedroom looking into the bedroom?
If you, if you opened the door and didn't enter the bedroom, the door would swing it'd be to the left. And there was adult size, I call it adult size because I don't know if it's a full or a queen, mattress that was on the wall that would be right on the left side. That wall would have been the same wall that separated what we call the master bedroom and this bedroom that the child was in. There was a car seat laying there, a bouncy swing. There was lots of clothes piled up. I saw diapers, blankets, and then in the corner, facing the corner, was a swing with the baby in it.
When you said you saw diapers, can you describe what you meant by that?
Yeah, I've got 4 children of my own, so I've had baby showers, and these were like the diapers that you get at a baby shower. They do them as baby cake, or when they roll them up and put a rubber band on them. Those were the diapers that I saw, newborn diapers.
And that was the size they were, was newborn diaper size?
Yes, they were.
And so would these have been clean diapers or soiled or dirty diapers?
They were clean diapers.
And they had rubber bands around them?
Yes, they did.
Oh. Did you enter the room?
Yes, I did.
Why'd you do that?
To start the investigation.
And as you entered the room, can you kind of describe for the jury how the room felt as far as air temperature and air movement?
Well, first, I'm sorry. Can I have something to drink, maybe?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that.
You have water down there?
I do, thank you, sir.
I'm fighting a cold, I'm sorry.
Sure.
I'm not going to touch your hand while I do.
Yeah, don't. Just set it right there. Thanks.
Let me just repeat the question for you, officer, okay? So when you entered the room, if you could just describe for the jury how it felt as far as air temperature and air movement.
The first thing I remember, even when I just opened the door, was thinking that this room, the heat was on, or that it was warmer, hotter than the rest of the apartment. The other thing I noticed immediately was the strong odor of human urine. I also noticed there was a big heavy quilt blocking the window, or on the window, so even if the window would have been open for air movement, it wouldn't have been able to get through that quilt. It was a thick quilt. There was no fan in that room. There was no air movement at all. But I didn't take the temperature, but it felt probably 10 degrees hotter in that room.
And when you say 10 degrees hotter, do you mean 10 degrees hotter than the rooms you'd walk through to get there?
Correct.
So the rest of the apartment was cooler than the room where Sterling was found?
Much.
And you mentioned that there was no fan in the room, is that correct?
Correct.
Was there an overhead light?
Yes.
Did the overhead light contain any type of fan on it?
It did not.
How about a box fan? Was there any box fan in that room?
There was not.
And so you mentioned when you walked in the room, you smelled a strong smell of urine, correct?
Yes.
Did you notice anything else as far as smells when you walked into the room?
When I got closer to baby and got down on his level, he's about 1.5 feet, 2 foot off the ground in that swing, I could smell, again, what I can only describe, because I've done this for years, as death. It's the smell of the body doing what the body does when someone's gone. That smell was stronger, of course, as I got closer. But I remember thinking that I could smell something fruity, or almost like air freshener-like. And at first I didn't realize what it was.
And did you ultimately realize what that fruity or smell was?
Yeah, right underneath the swing, or kind of off to the side, but right underneath the swing was these air freshener melts that you put in a candle and they melt, and the scentsies, and they put a scent in the room.
Now, when you talked about the smell that you smelled of urine when you entered the room, would it be, based on what you smelled that day, would it be obvious to anybody that entered that room that it smelled of urine and the other things you've described?
Yes.
Was it a strong smell?
Yeah, it was absolutely the strongest human urine smell I've ever smelled.
Now, you've talked about what you smelled and what you felt as far as the air temperature. I want to next talk about what you saw when you approached the swing where Sterling was located, okay?
Okay.
Can you describe what you saw as you approached the swing, and kind of describe for the jury how you approached the swing?
So, as I said, the door was kind of off to the side of the room a little bit, so when it swung open, you would have saw him in that corner, kind of off to the right. He would have been facing the corner there to the right. The room was such a mess that there was stuff stacked on top of the car seat, stuff stacked on top of the bouncer. There was clothes piled up to the what would be the right of me, behind the swing. So I just basically followed the path that was there to baby, and then there was a small space between the wall and in front of baby, and I got in front of baby.
And as you got in front of baby, how was that smell?
It was much, much stronger as I got in front of baby. When I got in front of baby, I touched baby and then moved a blanket. The reason I moved the blanket, I remember, was because there's a blue pair of pants underneath the swing, and I thought I wanted to make sure he had been clothed or diapered on the bottom half. And as I moved that blanket, that smell was so bad that I had to hold my breath. It was the most strong ammonia smell I'd ever smelled.
Now, can you describe what Sterling appeared to look like when you saw him?
Yes, Sterling, his eyes were open. He had bright blue eyes, and his head was tilted to the left. He had slid down in the swing a little bit. He wasn't hanging off of the swing, but he had slid down in the swing. He was wearing a blue top. I don't know if it was a onesie because I never got down that far, but it was a blue top. I do know he did have pants on. They were army type pants. He did have some blood or body fluids on his blue top that had come out his nose and his mouth. His little hands were clenched, and they were in a fist, and they were kind of up by his face.
Did you notice anything about his size?
The first thing I thought was, as I said, I have 4 children of my own, and one is actually about the same size, the same age as Sterling. And so when I was dealing with Sterling, I thought that our dispatcher had made a mistake, maybe or been told the wrong information. My 4-month-old didn't look like this one. He was very small, very skinny, sickly, very, very small.
Now, you mentioned you have experience with children yourself, correct?
Yes.
And you have 4 children?
Yes.
And one is about the same age as Sterling?
Yes.
Were you familiar with the swing that Sterling was seated in?
I actually had the exact same model of swing.
Now, can you describe that swing for the jury?
It's an electric swing. It's got 3 different features on it. It has of course, it has the swing, so that it could swing. The swing could do both side to side and front to back, so you could rotate baby. It also has a mobile, so baby could look at something, and the mobile would move. It also played music.
Now, what did Sterling's body feel like when you touched it?
It was cold and stiff. Rigor had set.
And you've described how Sterling was positioned on the swing and kind of how he was clothed, correct?
Yes.
Did you touch his clothing?
I did.
And why did you do that?
As I stated, I didn't know the call that came in that he had recently passed, and what I was looking at, that wasn't right. That was wrong. He had not recently passed, and so I touched underneath his collar where the blood and body fluids were to see, number one, if it was stiff or still wet, soft to the touch, or if I could try to get some sort of idea on how long that had been there.
And when you touched his body, how did the clothing, let me start over. When you touched his shirt and his clothing, how did the shirt feel first?
It was stiff.
And what do you mean?
If I touched him right underneath the chin, and the whole collar shifted where that body fluid was. It had dried and been there a while.
And his body was covered by a blanket, right? At least part of his body.
Yes.
What part of his body?
It would have been the lower part of his body. And
did you touch and move that blanket?
I did.
And you were looking for whether or not he had pants on, correct?
Right. As I stated, there was a blanket and some blue pants that would have fit Sterling directly underneath the swing. And so I thought I should check and see if he was diapered and clothed from the bottom side. And so I moved the blanket a little bit to see if that was the case.
And when you touched the blanket, what observations did you make of the blanket?
Well, the first thing I noticed is that the blanket was soaked in urine or body fluids. It was completely wet. I mean, it was vile. The smell. And as I moved the blanket, that smell just got worse.
Did you see anything come out from under the blanket or off the blanket or from around the blanket when you touched it?
Yes, I did.
What did you see?
Growing up in Iowa, I've always called them gnats. You have bananas or apples out on your counter, and you'll get these fruit flies, or I call them gnats, that'll come around, and that's what flew out from underneath the blanket.
And where did the flies go after they came out from under the blanket?
They went up by his face and then out in the room.
So does the baby lay on a cloth?
Yes.
And the cloth covers the plastic?
Yes.
Would that cloth be permeable to moisture?
Yes.
And now as far as the swing itself, when the child sits in the swing, are there any holes in the bottom of the swing?
Yes, there are. As I stated, that harness actually has to be pushed up through the backside, so there's 3 holes in the bottom of that swing.
And so when you looked around the area underneath and around the swing, what did you see?
When as I stated, when I walked into the room, I noticed that there was a blue pair of pants that would fit Sterling directly underneath the swing, and there was also a blanket.
And were these items located directly under the swing?
Yes.
Did you touch the items of clothing and other items of cloth that were located under the swing?
Yes, I did.
And what observations did you make of those clothing and other items when you touched them physically?
They were soaked in what I assumed to be the urine.
Now, were they located in such a position that the urine could have run off of Sterling's body onto those items underneath the swing?
The way that they were located, they would have it would have run off the swing through those holes from the harness. They were directly underneath where that would have come through.
Now, you had an opportunity that day to examine the entirety of the room where Sterling was found, that bedroom, correct?
Yes.
And you've already described that there was a wall that separated that room from the master bedroom, right?
Yes.
When you looked in the room where Sterling's body was found, you testified this morning that you found some diapers, correct?
Correct.
Did you find any soiled or used diapers in that back bedroom where Sterling was found?
No, I did not.
And you testified that you found some diapers that were rolled up and secured with rubber bands like the type you'd get at a baby shower or a similar type event, correct?
Yes.
And those had not been used, correct?
Correct, they were unused.
So no used diapers in the back room?
Correct, no used diapers in the back bedroom.
And then came Dr. Dennis Klein, the state's chief medical examiner, who delivered the most painful testimony of all. The courtroom grew silent as he described the biological damage, a child literally consumed from the inside out by neglect.
In your autopsy report, you have a section that's called pathologic diagnoses.
That's correct.
What does that mean?
So pathological deals with the diseases and abnormalities, and then diagnosis is what a doctor does to designate a particular finding or abnormality in the person and give it a name in medical terminology. So in the autopsy report, we have in outline form a list. Comes too low, or that salt concentration is either too high or too low, that can severely affect both the function of our heart and brains to the point that that could cause death. So this is just it's a medical term that designates a severe dehydration that happened to Sterling.
What was it with Sterling that made you come to that conclusion? What did you see?
So there are physical findings. One of them is you can see that the eyes are somewhat sunken, and then there's a finding called tenting. And so when our skin, if you were to pinch your skin, it immediately floats back because it's a normal component of water and salt in the skin. When someone is severely dehydrated, when you pinch their skin, it actually stays that way for a period of time. That's called tenting. And so the tissues underneath the skin become very sticky when there's not enough water. We also look at the fluid in the eyes that we're able to measure chemicals in there, one of those chemicals being sodium, and we saw that it is very low compared to what should be in the normal, otherwise healthy person.
In section 2, you had severe diaper dermatitis and skin breakdown. Tell us about that.
So dermatitis just means an inflammation of the skin, and diaper referring to the area where this occurs. This is a medical terminology that really refers to severe diaper rash. And so what we were actually able to see is that the skin integrity was breaking down to the point that some of that skin was starting to slough off. There was some dead skin, and we could also see that it was very red, and that was an area that bacteria would be able to enter into the body.
Was it like an open wound on Sterling, or what was it?
If anyone has seen a burn such that you would see like blisters, that's what it would look like to a person who hadn't seen this before.
And where did you see this on Sterling?
It was over the diaper area and extending over the areas of the diaper. So in and around the thighs, over the genitalia, the buttocks, and then it was extending up to the mid portion of the back.
Now, in this particular case, we've all had scrapes or burns or things like that, and they heal. So why in this particular case was that of interest to you or of importance?
So there's two things that were of interest to me. One was the extent of the area. So in any types of injuries in which there's a breakdown of skin, the percentage of the body that's involved with that is going to have a huge impact on the body's ability to fight that and to survive. So there was a significant skin surface area that was affected, but it was also the fact that this is an area of the body in which there is contact of feces and urine, which contains numerous concentrations of bacteria then that could easily enter into the body because the normal skin, which is designed to keep those bacteria out of the body, those natural barriers are broken down and that bacteria then can enter into the body.
And you're talking about this bacteria from the feces. Describe for the jury what you saw.
So there was clothing, there was a diaper, and within the diaper there was feces that had the appearance of beginning to decompose. So it had almost a sludge or sewage type of appearance and consistency.
It had been there a while.
Yes.
On section 3, you wrote maggot infestation of clothing and swing seat.
Yes.
Tell us about your findings on that.
So maggots are one of the life stages of flies. So flies will lay eggs in decomposing tissue. And then those flies will develop into, they look like little crawling worms and they're called maggots, and then they'll go through other various stages. So we saw these crawling maggots present on the clothing, and then Sterling was in a swing seat. We also saw it in the covering on the swing seat.
Did you also see it on his skin?
Yes.
In section 4, you put down failure to thrive. Tell us about that.
So failure to thrive is a descriptive term. Sometimes it's used by pediatricians to describe an infant or child who is not progressing in their physical development as what would be expected in a child who did not have disease and was properly nourished and receiving all the proper care.
And in particular with Sterling, why did you make this finding?
So we looked at the weight and height, and we compared that to the birth weight, and the birth weight of Sterling was approximately 3.02 kilograms, and when we did the autopsy, Sterling's weight was about 3.15 kilograms, so it was only about 150 grams over almost a 4-month lifespan. That's about right around 5.5 ounces of weight gain over that 4 months, which would be almost negligible growth. So that would be an indication of the body of Sterling not thriving in the normal growth of an infant.
Now, are you able to say if he never gained the weight, or if he gained weight and then lost it at some point? Are you able to say that?
I don't know. Typically, after a baby is born, pediatricians will want that baby to come back for visits such that you can get various height and weight checks, and those height and weights can be plotted on a curve and compared with what the standard or expected growth rate is for a child. So we only really have 2 points. We have the birth height and weight, and we have the death birth and weight. So I don't know where Sterling would have been on that growth curve, and if maybe he had increased and then decreased. We just don't know.
And that's because Sterling hadn't been to any baby well checks that could give you some different numbers.
That's correct.
And I should have asked that as part of your process at the medical examiner's office. You do go and get medical records of, had Sterling been to a doctor, things like that. You would have retrieved those, correct?
Yes.
What about his height?
So his height was less than what would be the 5th percentile. So most children would have been much had a greater height than what Sterling did. He did increase his height over his birth height.
What does that tell you?
So he was able to grow, so we don't have any indication that there necessarily was an abnormality in the bones that prevents normal growth, that it's more likely something else that's going on that's preventing weight gain.
In your opinion, that was malnutrition?
Yes.
With that height, that he did continue to grow with height, but not so much with weight. Is that any type of indication to you that there was an ongoing chronic stress?
It indicates to me that the normal process of the bones was likely occurring, but that there was inadequate nutrition in order to maintain and grow at a normal rate.
And as part of your autopsy, do you look for things like, could it be some type of disease? Could it be something he was born with that would have caused this?
Yes, we do go through a series of what we use in medicine called differential diagnosis. So we come up with a list of things that we know that can cause people not to thrive, and so we do our best to try to rule out each of those various diagnoses. So for instance, infections. We look for what's called metabolic disorders. So these are things on the molecular level that can prevent children from growing at a normal rate. We look at the intestines and the whole digestive tract. We look at under the microscope. We look at with our anatomically to make sure that there's no twists or things that can prevent children from growing normally. And going through all those different tests and observations, we were able to rule out the things in our differential diagnosis that would typically cause failure to thrive.
The verdicts were swift. In November 2018, Zachary Koehn was convicted of first-degree murder. He received life in prison with no possibility of parole. In February 2019, Cheyenne Harris was found guilty of the same charges. She too received life without parole. Neither showed remorse. Neither offered an explanation. There was no apology, no defense, only silence. Sterling Daniel Koehn lived for 121 days. Most of those were filled with hunger, pain, and abandonment. His story is no longer a headline. It is a haunting reminder that evil sometimes hides in plain sight, and that the worst monsters can look like ordinary people. Rest in peace, little Sterling. Thank you for staying with us through this heartbreaking story. Stories like Sterling's are never easy to tell, but they must be told. Not for shock, not for views, but because every child deserves to be seen. Every child deserves to be loved, and no child should ever suffer in silence. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it. It may help someone recognize the warning signs before it's too late. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and turn on notifications. And above all, take care of each other. Because children don't just need parents, they need protectors.
22-year-old Cheyenne Harris is less than a year into her life sentence.
What are you looking at?
Why have they moved you up to this ward?
Because I got into my first altercation.
A physical fight?
Yeah.
Why?
This girl, she made a comment that was directed directly towards my charge and why I'm here, and yeah, I turned around and beat the out of her.
What did she say that made you so angry?
She said, yeah, that's why you killed your son.
Did you kill your son?
No.
The courts clearly thought that you were responsible.
If I hadn't been high on meth, it never would have happened. I was not a good person when I was on meth and trying to be a mom. I wasn't. He was extremely neglected.
Where did you find him?
In his room, in his swing.
How long was he left alone for?
I can't say exactly sure how long he was left alone for.
I think it was days.
Yeah. It was days before I went in there.
You're clearly struggling mentally. Do you imagine this is how you will go on to exist?
I don't know. Other people here say that it gets better, that it won't be so hard, but in all reality, I think that's bullshit.
Do you think you'll hurt for the rest of your life?
Yeah, but I'll live.
Do you want to live?
Depends on the day.